All right, everyone, let's get the show started. Welcome to our DevOps office hours. It's December 15th, 2021. My name's Eric Osterman, and I'll be leading the conversation. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We're a DevOps accelerator, and that means that we help companies own their infrastructure in record time by building it together with your team and showing them the ropes. So if that sounds interesting, head over to cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. Again, that's cloudposse.com/quiz to get started. For those of you new to the call, the format is very informal. My goal is to get your questions answered. So if you want to jump in and participate, just go ahead and unmute yourself and chime in. If you're tuning in from our podcast or YouTube channel, you can register for these live and interactive sessions by going to cloudposse.com/office hours. Again, that's cloudposse.com/office hours. We host these calls every week. Our call today is recorded. We'll automatically post a recording of this session to our YouTube channel. So if you enjoy the content and want to support it, please hit those like and subscribe buttons. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse. Again, that's youtube.com/cloudposse. Also, don't forget to share these videos with your team. I know everyone can't make it. For some of you, this is a pretty inconvenient time, especially if you're based internationally. So share these videos via YouTube, and it's a great way to keep everyone else in the loop. With that said, let's head over to announcements. So last week, a couple hours after our office hours, HashiCorp dropped the ball. Usually they do it before our office hours. They do their releases, and 1.1.0 was officially released. So this is going to be a true test to see if Terraform meets up to its stated expectations that all 1.x releases should be backwards compatible. Obviously, they won't be forwards compatible, so we will still have versioning problems and probably still need to be careful about pinning versions in our environments. For this release, one of the most notable announcements is something we've talked about previously on office hours with one of the beta releases, is that state migrations is now a first-class concept, and you can write your modules and move your state around and create these little moved blocks in your Terraform files, and it'll be a hint towards the Terraform interpreter on how to handle movements of resources in your Terraform state. There's no automatic generation of these blocks. You still need to know how to write those migrations. And we haven't yet come up with any conventions, of course, around this at Cloud Posse, but I wouldn't be surprised if we chime in on this. I think we'll piggyback on what other frameworks have done for like database migrations, maybe creating migrations files so that we can version our migrations and keep track of when these changes happen, so they're just not sprawled all over the place. I'm less excited about the Terraform Cloud specific bindings that they're extending into the client. There's been some controversy around that. To me, I totally get it. Look, they're a company, they got to make money. They have the right to introduce extensions within the Terraform CLI, even if it is open source. And better warnings now if you are decrementing a count, which will cause resources to be destroyed. Anybody else have exciting announcements from the Terraform 1.1 release that you're looking to use? All right. Next announcement is, well, just something that came across as we were going through finding mitigations for how to handle Helm releases and how, actually, that's a separate topic I should just talk about. Anyways, Helm, as we discovered, Helm isn't very good at picking up changes made on the server side anymore. That config drift we discovered, and we thought it was a regression in some of the things we were implementing. So we were looking for alternatives, and one of the ideas was, well, what if since we're using ArgoCD and we want to use Helm, what if we are terraforming ArgoCD to do Helm releases? So we assumed there's got to be an ArgoCD provider out there. I wonder what that looks like. We haven't kicked the tires on this yet, so I was just kind of curious if anybody has, scratched the surface, beyond the surface of the Terraform provider for ArgoCD. All right, guess not. Something I stumbled across. I don't know about you guys, but I'm always starting repositories on GitHub. I like this new ability that I can associate my stars now with different lists, and you can create your own lists and organize projects. So a little UI polish that they've added, much needed. Yeah. A little lackluster announcement. Apple, obviously leverages tons and tons of open source in all of its products. They are now formalizing their usage of that on an open source website. But it's pretty thin. And like, okay, oh, really interesting. Okay, cool. So Apple's using Kubernetes. Let's learn a little bit more. Oh, so Kubernetes is this automated platform for deploying and scaling containers. I didn't know, but it doesn't really share anything about what Apple's usage is of that, how they're contributing. So very early release of their open source website. Anyone using AWS is intimately aware of the the outage that happened last week, and the postmortem has finally, the official postmortem has come out. Apparently, it's pretty scant on some of the details, as I guess Amazon either doesn't want to release sensitive internal matters on how it operates its network, or there's more to this than meets the eye, as conspiracy theorists will note this happened at the same time of the Biden summit. And were there things going on that they were reacting to at the same time? Who knows? There was another write-up on this that I kind of liked. Where is it? Yeah, this one here. I like the register write-ups. I wouldn't expect the register to have good, meaningful explanations of things, but I find myself often referring to them with good TLDRs of what went wrong. And a couple of the notable highlights that led to the slowdown of remediation by Amazon of this incident was that Amazon itself, is using Amazon to monitor services, and well, that they couldn't access their own platform for triaging what went wrong. They had to revert to just looking at the raw log files. I can relate to this. We used to deploy Prometheus and Grafana on the Kubernetes clusters that they were monitoring, and when there were black swan situations on our clusters and everything went down, often it meant Grafana and Prometheus also went down. So we would also revert to having to look at the logs when things went wrong. So while we can say, quote unquote, shame on you, these are hard things to solve, and I don't believe in blaming anyone. I'm sure Amazon learned an enormous amount. They've obviously built the largest cloud out there. These things don't go unnoticed internally. I think that if anything, what this goes to show is that these are hard problems that even Amazon has to deal with. And I hate it when these things come up and everyone says, oh, we should have just stayed in the data center. And it's just like, that's just pulling the wool over one's eyes.
Yes, because when you run your own data center, I'm sure you do it better than Amazon does on a global scale.
Exactly.
And you would never have these problems.
The hubris. I thought it was also really interesting. There was, I think, here at the very bottom, which is kind of interesting that, well, they are operating this tremendously large multi-region infrastructure, 21 regions and counting. The dashboard is apparently still hosted in US East 1, the original region for AWS. And the fact that Amazon hasn't been able to solve that yet leaves me like, huh, that's interesting. Seems like that would be a higher priority. What else did I want to highlight here?
I think that screams of, devs saying, hey, we want to do this, and being overruled by finance people or whoever.
I would say in other organizations, maybe, but Amazon's costs for operating in multiple regions for their own stack, I don't know. It's probably pennies on the dollar. Also, they had this problem again. This is not the first time, so I guess, you know, first time, yeah, you're excused. Second time, it's a problem. Their status page wasn't getting updated, and you know, Amazon refuses to put their status page on Azure or something, so they could be decoupled. But maybe that's what they should consider, is putting it outside of their network and control. That's at least what we advise our customers. Any other highlights from this outage? Observations? All right. The other obviously exciting announcement, or how, depending on how you look at it, was this log4j exploit that, you know, affects basically, you know, every single embedded device and any app written in Java for the last decade or longer. Oh, I guess not decade. Technically, I think this was introduced in 2013 as a result of, I think, log4j 2.0 beta 9 or something. And I thought this was the best write-up I saw of how this attack works. And basically a well-formed HTTP request with this interpolation is sent over to the victim server, which causes a callback to an LDAP server that they have to, that could be their own LDAP server that they control the response. The response from that LDAP server could be to load a Java code base from any source and run a function. So that's how the attack vector works. So obviously, this has to be supported within your environment. And it's relatively easily thwarted if you have a WAF in place using something like Cloud for AWS WAF. AWS WAF has come out with the rule set for the log4shell exploit, which I should have linked here, but yeah, we'll share that. Here it is.
Just to add that the variants that I have been seeing are changing a lot. Like every day I'm seeing new variants for the same payloads. Some of them are bypassing the WAF, like even the ones set for AWS WAF or Cloudflare and also.
It's whack-a-mole, right? And ultimately, the problem with most of these WAF solutions is they all come down to regexes, a la something mod security. So
this is the perfect example to talk about why egress rules on wherever your web servers are hosted are really important.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's really expensive to do that properly without causing nightmares for everyone in the engineering teams.
It's hard to do retroactively, right? Like if you're starting a new project fresh in an isolated account, a new set of accounts, you can start this way. But you have an existing environment, yeah, good luck. Good luck locking down egress retroactively. It affects everything from Docker pulls to, you know, fetching assets and DNS and things like that. And just, you know, this is kind of like just a, you know, Me Too opportunity. People were quick to point out that, you know, there's this critical library that powers most of the web, or much of the web, and you know, it is open source, and I have no idea what level of funding is available to this project, but it's too big to fail, you could say. It's kind of interesting. Open source is getting to the point where open source is probably too big to fail, and there should be some thought on how to handle that.
So I have been working a lot on the research of this vulnerability in particular.
Okay.
And I released a tool that allows you to scan your network for potential log4j vulnerabilities. And just to say, if you have log4j, you are probably being scanned now, and it's better to have your network scanned now by yourself before, or by a security team before someone else scan you and find another vulnerability and then exploit it. And I tried it personally before when I was developing the tool. That's why I really wanted to open source the tool for everyone.
Did you share it? Share it in the Office Hours channel so everyone
Yeah,
can check it out.
Yeah, I will share it. So triaging the vulnerability from just sending in a DNS query to verify the existence of the vulnerability is really easy, and then going to set up an LDAP server that allows you to do that is fully automated. There are toolings for that, and you can get an instance shell pretty easily without really doing a lot of complex work. There are attackers that are exploiting it. There are ransomware that are being deployed now that are using that. People are getting creative with WAF rules. So find all of the log4j instances as soon as possible, hopefully before someone else finds it.
Yeah, that's cool. And Majin, you're actually a security researcher, as I recall, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you do consulting on security or?
Yeah, I do consulting on cloud security, and I also founded a company called Full Hunt. I'm not planning to do a marketing pitch, but we do attack surface discovery for organizations. We have a free website. You can go in and type your website name, and then you would find all of the public assets. From there,
cool.
it can help you out to figure out what websites that are public, and then you can use the other open source tool to scan your websites to see like if it triggers any callbacks and find vulnerable assets.
Well, feel free to share your open source tools. I think it's relevant for everyone.
Yeah, for sure.
Any questions on this before we move on? Log4Shell exploits, any or other observations? Anybody been bit by it yet? Like had an attack that you can disclose? All right. Moving on. This was just a small, it's a small thing that came up in my newsfeed. I thought it was a clever name. It was called Buzzkill, but it's a kill cord for your laptop, like you're a road warrior working out of your coffee shops or other places. If you're already logged into a laptop and somebody swipes it, they have, it's already unlocked. You can do anything with it. So the concept here is a kill switch. So if it's out of your reach and this physical device, could be attached to your wrist or something, then it automatically bricks your laptop. Maybe not bricks it, but at least locks it. And it's, I believe, based on open source. Yeah, GPL3. Kind of cool. All right, last announcement was just something I came across more recently. So, GitHub has been investing more in their projects tool as I would say a lightweight alternative for things like Jira. So for the longest time, it supported boards, which we've seen like this, which is nice. But I thought for roadmaps, this was especially nice. And I was looking here at the GitHub Actions roadmap, which is really just the GitHub public roadmap filtered for the Actions label. And I think this is a really nice visualization and a great way for projects to share what their roadmap is in a way that also supports commenting on any of these items. All right. Any other announcements before we move into Q&A? Matt, you always have some news.
I've been lacking this week in outside activities. I've had my head down on a couple of things, so haven't done a lot of reading. Sorry to disappoint.
Okay, no worries. Let's move into Q&A then. So I'm going to start with some of the questions that were posted to the channel and that we have in our agenda. Then we'll open it up to the audience. First question was by Michael Holt. Has anyone had experience setting up persistent storage with EKS on Fargate profiles? And I don't think we've actually tried to do that. Our approach would have been to use the AWS EFS controller, and I assume that works with Fargate, but don't know.
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to do. And no matter what I've tried to do, it keeps coming up with the same error on trying to actually access the EFS endpoint.
Yeah, have you looked at CloudTrails? My guess is it's IAM related.
That's a really good point though, because when you do it, you have to set up the security group.
Yeah, so I've got the security group set up. I've got the IAM service account set up, all of that. And I've been banging my head against the wall on this one. So I was just looking to see if anybody else had any experience with it. The annoying thing is my company, without providing any guidance, was like, if you're going to do EKS and AWS, you have to use Fargate. Managed node groups use too many IP addresses.
No.
So I kind of don't have an option.
and then they see the build from Datadog and they realize, wait, why did our Datadog host count jump by 100?
Yeah, we actually don't use Datadog. We're using Elastic Observability. But
okay. Okay, cool. Well, if you do figure it out, feel free to drop a line there and with what it turned out to be.
Yep, I will. Thanks.
Always be helpful for the next person. Let's see, next question that I had on here was, this was answering a question that, we kind of answered, but I thought it was a good one. And I liked it because I got to play devil's advocate a little bit. So the question that was posed was by Sheldon, a long-time community participant, and he was asked, so he says, I know about 12-factor apps for a while, and for those of you unfamiliar with 12-factor, it's a standard pioneered by Heroku, over a decade ago on how to build apps that are easily deployed to cloud environments. And one of the recommendations in that is to use environment variables for configuration. So anybody who's been at this for a while probably has been indoctrinated into this, and anybody new coming into this is like, dude, why are we using environment variables? When you come in from a software background and the config files seem a more natural fit. So I thought I'd take a stab at answering this and why not environment variables? Why should you stay away from them? And I came up with quite a long list, and I thought I'd codify this a little bit more in our internal ADRs for Cloud Posse on why we use environment variables despite this. So the general problem statement is that when we're deploying apps to Kubernetes or ECS, for example, we want an easy way to pass parameters to the application without hard coding those settings. There's obviously multiple approaches, nonetheless using config files. And one of the most common patterns always cited says to use environment variables, but environment variables might not be suitable for all situations. So obviously, the great things about using environment variables is that they're portable configuration formats supported by basically every mainstream language out there. They're easily understood. They're just simply key value pairs. So you can come up with any convention you want for them, and therefore they're easily implemented. They're supported as first-class primitives within Kubernetes, Docker, ECS, Beanstalk, you name it. And many ways of implementing it easily with SSM. For example, with Chamber on the command line, or with external secrets operator for Kubernetes. And it's recommended obviously by a 12-factor pattern. But there's many situations you want to be aware of if you are using this. And one of the major ones that I've had come up from security teams is like, wait, we're using environment variables to pass secrets, yet environment variables are readable by any user on the system with access to the /proc file system. And there's really not much one can do about that as far as I know. Now, obviously, in a containerized environment, there's very low multi-tenancy within a container, and any attacker with access to that container, it's probably already game over. The other issue that bit us hard at Cloud Posse, which was a hard lesson learned, is when we had our first implementation of our reference architecture, we based it very, very, very heavily on environment variables. And then when we came across Durham, it was like, game over. Like, oh, we're all in on environment variables for configuration. Have Durham files all over the place. When you change directory here, these environment variables are set. When you go over here, these other environment variables are set. And it seemed like a good idea at the time, but the reality was it really sucked. Because one of the things with environment variables is it's really hard to validate if that environment variable was named correctly. It might look almost identical to the environment variable that you needed to set, but it's off by something. Maybe it's a typo, or maybe it's literally the wrong setting, but it looks like the right setting. And it's hard to validate in applications when something has set the wrong setting that shouldn't have even been there. But when you have a config file, for example, that's very easy to validate, like JSON schema. So we also noticed that there would just be too many environment variables sprawled all over the place, and it became unwieldy. So that's one of the negatives I don't like with environment variables. If your app, today doesn't support environment variables, as many more legacy apps are, you're going to still have to templatize that config file with environment variables. And now you have this extra layer of abstraction in between your app and your parameters getting deployed. And so there's that. And ultimately, since you can only have scalars and environment variables, is pretty limiting. You have to serialize any data structures using JSON or YAML, and JSON or YAML inside of an environment variable is very ugly.
It's also, I know you sort of mentioned that the ECS task definitions there, but one of the other things is that there's a maximum size for your total environment, and there's a maximum size for an environment variable as well. So if you have long environment variables that you're setting config in, or you have too many environment variables, and it depends on the execution environment, but I believe Lambda, for instance, has like a 4K maximum size of an environment variable, of all environment variables.
So I had thought of that. I should just link to this article, I guess, but I was trying to get a concrete number, and I found this Stack Overflow post, and I'm like, never mind. It's just funny because there's like 10 examples of scripts to figure out how long that environment variable is, and everyone came up with a different answer.
Yeah, I can tell you for sure in Lambda, it's 4K because I hit it on a previous project, and because we were passing in a large serialized JSON structure to it, and it got hit. It got hit when we did that. So anyway. I think most distributions are like 32K by default.
Yeah, if anyone has any breakdown of what these are, I'd love to link to it. If somebody has that. Similarly, Kubernetes config maps are capped at 1 meg. You got to get pretty crazy if you're going to hit that much in environment variables. But if you're packing in a lot of other config into a config map, it could be a problem. It's not supported. So then, like, that sounds pretty awful. Why are we using environment variables when configuration files, don't have a lot of those trade-offs? Like with config files, it's first-class citizen in Kubernetes with config maps, which can be mounted directly to the file system. It works with legacy apps as well as it works with new apps. We can still use environment variables. We just need to template the config files with those environment variables. And environment variables suck in a CICD context. Like, how do you get your environment variables to staging, to prod with config files, and especially encrypted config files like with stop secrets? It's much more straightforward, perhaps, to do that. But there are downsides, obviously, with config files as well.
Don't forget about set minus X.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's a good. I'm going to add that here. Where's my seat? I'll update that later. This has been like a problem for us sometimes. It's like arguably a best practice when you're writing shell scripts in an automated fashion is to use set-x so that when things error 7 months from now, you haven't touched it, you'll know exactly the line that errored because set-x causes your scripts to emit every line as it's being executed, including that line that exported the secret that you just pulled from SSM and just leaked it. So that's not a best practice. And there are workarounds. You can turn it off and turn it back on again, but that's error prone, like memory handling. So we don't have a fail-safe for this other than just to say, be advised.
Yeah, also not just, excuse me, not just CICD, but EC2 user data is another place this happens a lot. Downside with config files is obviously 1,000 formats for it. We learned not to write XML anymore.
There's a little bit of a mitigation in some CI/CD systems for that set-x stuff, where you add that secret as a secret in that CI system, like GitHub Actions, right? You can set that as a secret value there, and then it will prevent it from leaking into that log. But of course, if you're pushing those logs elsewhere, then there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, and if the secret wasn't defined in GitHub Actions, but the secret came from SSM, but yeah, it's a good point. There's some systems have those mitigations, and masking is kind of something. It'd be nice to be able to ensure that there was more consistent way to do masking or tagging of sensitive environment variables.
It'll mostly stop screw ups, but if someone is able to, get a script into your job, then they put a dot between each letter or whatever, and then it won't mask it anymore.
Yeah, right. Things like that. So nonetheless, our recommendation is still use environment variables. It's the lesser evil for us. Greatest portability, flexibility across the tools. Just be advised of when it doesn't work. And there you have it. Any last questions, concerns, suggestions on environment variables for Sheldon? All right, next question I have is actually a question from yours truly. So we recently invested in a pretty, what I thought was a very elegant workflow with GitHub Actions and Packer. We deploy self-hosted GitHub runners for our customers. And we have implemented now Packer workflows to build the golden AMIs needed by standalone services or EKS clusters, for example. That's nice. It's opinionated, of course, on that you're using GitHub Actions, that GitHub Actions have been deployed, which is a cold start problem. It's using Packer by HashiCorp, which has a very nice and clean DSL, supports everything. But I'm curious how mature or how polished the implementation is for EC2 Builder, Image Builder within Amazon, and if the Terraform support for it is more or less turnkey, meaning we don't have to call local exec to shell out to the AWS client, for example. Is anybody using EC2 Image Builder with Terraform, and how well is that working? Everybody's using Packer, I guess.
Well, I guess for both use cases, whether you do your way with Packer or EC2 Image Builder, you start from the baseline where you have a AMI already present in AWS, and then you start building on top of that, and then you build it. However, if you've been living, let's say you have legacy or traditional application and such, like where you build your ISO, or let's say a fork of a OS, and then you need to kind of import that one, then these tools doesn't help you. So then you still rely on getting out a VMDK and use the VM import tool to the VMDK convert. So
I guess my concern was more about Terraform specific. Can I run Terraform apply and the output is an AMI? Or do I have to run Terraform to create some resources, and then I need to shell out to the AWS client to trigger a build of that resource, because Terraform doesn't handle commands that are stateless? And yeah, and because the issue with Packer is Packer still needs to run somewhere. You have to have all the Packer installed. You have to have all that environment set up. And in the case of like how we're running GitHub Actions, we still have to get the GitHub Actions deployed before we can run Packer, before we can do all that. So I was hoping that we could have a turnkey solution, very simple module, just a AMI factory with Terraform.
I don't think you can do that, but last time I looked into it was about a year ago, because I was running, I was the same thing. We're using Packer, which works great, but we kind of wanted the same thing, something a little more, a less overhead, and something that we could work natively with. And at that time, you just couldn't do it.
Yeah. All right. I'll have to look into it.
I'm curious if Packer is pursuing something similar to Terraform modules, like where you can have a module with a remote source.
They have Packer Cloud. That's all I can say. I thought that's where you were going to go, which would kind of address some of my concerns. But it would be really cool to have a Packer registry. Wouldn't that be nice? I'm almost surprised there isn't a Packer registry. Matt,
They have been, with the most recent couple versions of Packer, they've been tearing everything out of the core Packer and breaking everything out into modules. So now there's like a Packer init command that loads each builder and everything separately. So it's not baked into Packer core anymore, as of like 7.2 or something.
Yeah, the one thing that they still don't have is like the ability to use modules within Packer. So you can't build like reusable components and then call them and then do the stuff. It gets really not dry, I guess. I was gonna say, I don't know if it's wet is the is the opposite of not being dry, but anyway, you have to copy and paste a lot of stuff if you're reusing code. So I hate that part.
Yeah, I think that was the comment. Like, when are they coming out with the registry or modules, which would be needed for that? That'd be cool. That'd be really cool.
There are some things that are nice about Packer that you can't do with Terraform though, because you can use some core HCL features that aren't available in Terraform. Like you can just pull in environment variables And you can't do that with Terraform. You have to do like export GFR or whatever, you know. And in Packer, you can just specify env and then your env name as inside of a variable block. So like that stuff can be nifty sometimes.
Yeah. This actually reminded me of something else we learned from one of our customers this past week. Thought I'd share it as an announcement, was Cruft. So the reason I bring this up is, well, Packer doesn't support modules, but this is where templating comes into play, and where cookie cutter, the techniques like that could be leveraged. A customer of ours showed us Cruft, which is fully compatible with cookie cutter for template generation. But the benefit with Cruft is it actually helps you maintain your code with, I believe, three-way merges after the fact. So if you update your templates, you can rerun Cruft and regenerate the boilerplate. Obviously, it's not a silver bullet for every kind of change you make to your templates, but it will reduce some of the overhead trying to keep your boilerplate your modified boilerplate consistent with your upstream templates. Has anybody been using Cruft?
No, but that sounds interesting, particularly in conjunction with the Git xargs project from Gruntwork.
Yeah, yeah. Combination of something like that. We're also looking into using Git xargs for some administrative stuff that we need to do across our org. Another so the way how this use case came up for us, and this actually, it somewhat is a nice segue into the next question that was asked. Next question was asked, like, where does Concourse fit into all this? So it's a conversation on CICD. So before I get into that, what we have been doing is defining CICD interfaces for our customers using GitHub Actions. And what we want to do is make it very easy for customers to onboard any service into the CICD framework. So GitHub Actions has made this a lot easier with composite actions. So composite actions are a way to express a snippet of a workflow, basically, in a action from a remote repo. So what we'll do is we'll create a CI composite action, and then we'll create a CD composite action, like a CD for ArgoCD, a CD for a single page SPA. And then we need to use those actions in a microservice. So what we're doing is we create a cookie cutter config in a shared repository. And then when you want to onboard a new service into your release engineering framework, you can just run a cookie cutter. It'll ask you, like, is this a Docker app? Is this a single page app? Is this Elixir or something? And then it'll ask you, what's your health check endpoint? And you want preview environments enabled, and all these feature flags. And then it spits it out, builds up your CI/CD pipelines, your GitHub action workflows in the repo. You commit those and you're golden. Now with something like Cruft, we would be able to then actually update those patterns as we update our supported patterns in the centralized templates. All right, so any questions?
It's interesting your pattern here, because what I have at my work is we have a central repo, let's call it templates, for example, right, where you have different categories, where you have different workflows or different, I don't know, Git ignore, you name it, whatever it needs to be shared across the organization on various repos with different topics. And that works in a way, but the new V2, so to speak, is like, what if we need to, let's say, like you said, a new service to be onboarded, or someone needs to kind of crack on with a new project? Can we have like a let's say click button, so to speak, where it goes, creates the repo in the organization, has streamed all the common files like GitHub action workflows and such. Like, I know you guys have something like that, but that's where we started a bit different. And I think what you just mentioned touch base around the same use case in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I think they're complementary. There are three ways in GitHub that this is solved today. One is with template repos. So you can mark any repository as a template. So and then you can
right.
just click a button, use this template.
Yeah.
Then when you create new repos, like here, you can select from one of your repository templates. So that's one way. But those repository templates are very static. They're not parameterized, right?
Yeah.
So what you might want to do is have a hybrid where you have template repositories combined with cookie cutter configurations. So you can create a new repo with the scaffolding in place, including the cookie cutter config. So then you run one command and do the last mile configuration. And the third thing to be aware of are GitHub, what do they call it? Community health, I think they call it, files. Easiest thing is just to go to Cloud Posse /.github. So you can have a repo called .github, but why I don't Google what there's a github.com/.github. So there. So you can have a GitHub repository named .github.
Right.
And this is a special repository in your GitHub organization where you can define shared files like your pull request templates, your issue templates. For open source projects, you can define your funding, how to be funded, for example, GitHub sponsors and so forth. So three ways to standardize your GitHub usage.
Yep. Cheers.
All right. And so Danny, I guess
That's
your question.
Me.
All right,
Yeah,
all right.
yeah. I'm the guy who has been buzzing you a bit.
All right, well, keep those questions coming. We always like to be helpful in those areas. So your question was related. This is something we kind of pulled out of context in the sweetops Slack. You've been asking a lot of questions around CICD. Last week there was another question on like, CDK versus Terraform, and can they coexist? And we answered that. And then you were running into issues here with Bitbucket pipelines and wanted to understand like some of those trade-offs. I don't think we necessarily answered your question on that, but let's jump ahead onto this one here, because this is something I think that is confusing to folks and we can clear it up. So Danny's asking, he just learned about yet another CI platform. In this case, is Concourse CI. And where does Concourse CI fit into the bigger picture of all these other tools like Flux and ArgoCD and GitHub Actions? And before we get started, let's first stop and pause and look back at where we've come from. So the term CICD is thrown around loosely. They're all CI and CD are often combined into being the same thing and used on the same platform. I'll be honest, in my engineering history, as I got started with all of this, they were always the same thing. For example, when it started, it was Jenkins, and Jenkins did our CI, and Jenkins did our CD. And yet Jenkins was technically for CI. And that's why this line between CI and CD for me was always blurred. So the thing is that tools can often do more than one thing. And something like Jenkins, which was originally intended for CI, which is how do you check out your code? How do you test it? How do you validate it? That's where it got started. And then it turned out to be a Swiss Army knife where you can run cron jobs in it. You can trigger deployments. You can do anything with Jenkins. Same thing goes for like CodeFresh, a platform we were using for many years. GitHub Actions, they can all be used for CD as well. And then there's kind of been this resurgence of CD as a platform, CI as a platform. So on the CD front, there's now multiple vendors solving CD specialized tools. CD stands for, depending on who you ask, continuous delivery or continuous deployment. Depending on how you think about it, they are the same thing or different things. I would say continuous delivery is different actually from continuous deployment, depending on how mature your processes are. So deployment or delivery is concerned with how do you get artifacts out disseminated. For example, you build a Docker file. How do you deliver that Docker image to the given environments? And deployment is when it's actually deployed to those environments, and release is when it's accessible to people using those services. You have tools like Flux, they are the inventors of this term GitOps. I think they are the first ones to really drive it home. And Flux has this idea that there should be what's called an immutability firewall. I think this was an epiphany for me when I heard it explained as a way to express it to other people how to think about this. And that is, the problem is if your CI systems are also doing your deployments, your CI systems have full access to your production servers, production secrets, all of that stuff. And anybody who has access to manipulate the workflows has therefore access to basically manipulate production, exfiltrate secrets, and so forth. And since CI frequently runs on pull requests, this stuff might be stuff that never even enters into your main branch, your default branch. So the idea with Flux was, well, what we should do is reduce concerns. Think about CI as only responsible for one thing, basically building images and artifacts and testing that they do what they said they were going to do. But it has no ability to affect what's in production directly. So checks and balances. Then you have Git. Git is an example. It doesn't have to be Git, but you need some immutable storage system with versioned histories of what you want deployed. And that's what they're calling this immutability firewall. So in the case of GitOps with Flux or ArgoCD, the pattern is you have your CI systems, build images, push those somewhere, create the deployment artifacts that you want to use, like the Kubernetes manifests, put those somewhere, like Git or S3. And then those are versioned in perpetuity. You can't easily manipulate the Git history. Then you have a separate concern. How do we take what was stuck in Git and ship it? How do we get it to production, to dev, to staging? And that's the role of continuous delivery. Now, it could be the same system, but even if you were using Jenkins, I would argue you probably don't want to have it be the same server. You'd probably want to have it be two separate ones. Now, we don't use Jenkins anymore. We use predominantly GitHub Actions. And for customers that want this kind of immutability firewall, we are working with ArgoCD. So in this case, what we do is we deploy ArgoCD into a Kubernetes cluster, and we have ArgoCD watching this centralized Git repository for changes. When it sees changes, ArgoCD's sole responsibility is synchronizing it, reconciling what is in that Git repository with what is in Kubernetes and making them identical. And then when they're drifting, it also lets you know that. So I think if you think about this, now let's go back to this conversation. What's Concourse CI? So Concourse CI, we don't have firsthand experience with Concourse CI, but I've heard good things about it. It's like a fully command line driven CI tool, doesn't rely on a UI per se, or if there is a UI, you can't make changes via that UI. It's all command line driven operations with the Clyde tool. But I don't believe Concourse CI is optimized for the CD perspective. And that's where you have tools like ArgoCD, Flux, Harness.io, which is like a CD purpose-built SaaS platform for delivery.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, so a bit of context, all this started because I think is when I hit an issue with the fact that you know, everyone says infrastructure as a code, and then you have different patterns, whether it's serverless, whether it's containers, ECS, EKS, or even EC2, and then you go with Terraform. And I love one of your webinar on TF, when you said it was on with Code Fresh a long time ago, when you said about the transactional, because coming from CFN world, and even before that SoulStack and Ansible and such, like the old school. Now when you came to TF, you know, a lot of folks, and this is kind of pissed me off in a way, is a lot of folks are going with oh yeah, you go with the simple one where you merge to master and then you go TF apply and Merry Christmas. And you know, every time TF apply fails. And when that happens, is like, okay, because I also like to kind of keep a pristine Git history. And that doesn't work anymore. And then is when, you know, I saw your talk, and then but then it goes into another landscape where, okay, so what do you do when you step into like one of your customers, for example, others who invested in GitHub.com, for example, and they pay an enterprise license, which you know, it's not cheap. Is what, let's say maybe $21 per user per month. When they pay that you know, those money, they expect something in return, right? And then when you say, well, you know what, you need to have something specialized for CD because you need the preview environment, you need that, and then it doesn't cut anymore.
This is like telling your carpenter, stop using screwdrivers. You have to use a hammer. We bought you a hammer. Stop using the screwdriver. Just the hammer works with the screws. Just bash them in there.
Right. Yeah, and then, you know, with Terraform, you definitely need, in my view, the sweetops type of style, where you kind of keep iterate, especially before the stuff gets into. But then obviously the specialized tool works brilliantly. But when you go into and things which don't work very well, and you guys already said with TF and lambdas, and you know, everyone just go with latest. Although we said in containers, or don't use latest tag. We win lambdas, that's everyone what does. And you know, when you're trying, okay, different deployment patterns, things fall apart. And I don't even want to mention about CDK. CDK, everyone is banging on CDK, but no one fixed the real problem with okay, what's the CDK pipeline and how that works. So anyway, that's the whole context, a big context. I throw it to you, but yeah, you kind of see where.
Yeah, it was a mouthful, but the good thing is we'll probably have more to show beginning of next quarter.
Right.
I'm hoping we can show more under the hood of what we're doing at Cloud Posse with our continuous delivery strategies for Terraform. And that's that. Let's leave it at that. I'm going to move on to the next question here on kitchen-terraform. Any opinions or thoughts on that? I haven't looked at the thread myself yet, so let's pull this up and see. Okay, no responses yet. So kitchen-terraform, I believe this is test kitchen for Terraform implemented in Ruby. And my bias on this is just going to be, look, I love Ruby as much as, well, the next person who also loves Ruby. There's a lot of hate around it as well. What I think is a fair shot against it is, if you are a Ruby shop, then I think this might make a lot of sense if you are trying to build test infrastructure for your organization. If you are a company like Cloud Posse that is trying to build a reusable ecosystem of Terraform modules, if we had to also expect our end users to install Ruby and gems and all of these things to get our tests to work, it would be a different situation. I guess with containers, we can always package that up, bundle that up as a test kitchen Docker image ready to go for our Cloud Posse modules, but that is, alas, not the direction we are going. So I think that until Terraform provides more concrete guidance on how to do actual testing natively in Terraform, there's some RFPs for that, but nothing really formal. I think really Gruntworks is TerraTest, which is what we're using, is probably the most adopted solution out there. Obviously, the learning curve is high, and it expects users to develop their tests in Golang. I think there's been some talk about maybe having some DSL together with it. I don't like the plain English DSLs for testing, because then you got to learn the language of the DSL, because yes, it reads like natural language, but you have to learn the actual syntax, and I understand the Go much better. But Matt Calhoun, I know you got a lot of thoughts on this probably.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I don't like about TerraTest, I'll say, is, and it's not a symptom of TerraTest, it's a symptom of Go testing in general, but where mature testing frameworks in other languages like JUnit or Jest in Java and JavaScript, or the NUnit and the .NET framework, etc., have like event hooks for things like set up, tear down, before each, after each, all those kind of things that the Go testing purposely doesn't have that, and they say that they don't feel that it's necessary and they'd rather keep it simple. And I find that when you're writing large test suites, especially of repetitive things that you want to test with modules, that it's really difficult. You end up writing a lot more code to do that. So that's one of the big downsides that I see there. And then the second thing that I'll just say is that while I understand it's easier for you to read the Go code than it is to read like the assertions or the more plain language like assertions, I think that probably isn't the majority of people. And also in test output, it's much more friendly if we have those things in there to actually read what test passed and what test failed, and all that kind of thing. So I don't know. That's just my 2 cents. Oh, it looks like we actually lost Eric. Maybe he didn't like my long-winded answer.
That means we get to stick around all afternoon.
I mean, I think the Zoom meeting will stay up and running as long as someone here is on it. So feel free. You might talk to yourself for the rest of the afternoon. But, I think we pretty much hit time anyway. So I don't know, maybe it's a good point to kind of wrap it up at that point and say we'll thank you, and we'll see everyone next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you, man. See you.
Bye.